Hi, good evening, everybody. This feels like an exciting Friday evening. I'm Tamanna from Agami, and along with Bangalore International Center, we're set up to have a great conversation with Vibha, Suhaib, Disha, and Anand today. Um, I just want everyone to take a minute. We'll drop in the chats their bios. You can get to know them a little bit before we begin. And along the way, feel free to like jump in with questions or comments or anything you want to add to the conversation as well. Today, Anand's going to be speaking to these three young, incredible people who are doing work to really just transform what justice could mean as a collective experience, what their role is in this process. And over to you, Anand, to take that forward.
Thanks, Tamanna. Thanks for inviting me to have this conversation, and I'm so excited to meet these three wonderful people today. And I'm traveling today. I'm in a small village in Kerala. At the moment, I'm in Alapi. I'm in Pariyaram, in fact, close to Kannur, and it's uh, just right before, as it happens with these things, right before the conversation began, there was a power cut on my end, so I'm candle lit. So I look like I've just stepped out of Tumbad or one of my films, and it's exciting that we're talking about justice. We're talking about the future of justice in a beautifully candle lit setting. Uh, I start with Buckminster Fuller and an idea that this beautiful metaphor that I often use from Buckminster Fuller, when he spoke about, he said, often I often have people ask me, what would it be like to be aboard a spaceship? And I often find myself responding by saying, uh, what it will be, uh, what it'll feel like to be aboard a spaceship. That's what we've always ever experienced. We are aboard a spaceship. We are living on a spaceship. It's a very small spaceship, 8,000 miles in diameter, hurtling through space at 60,000 miles an hour. It's a minuscule dimension in the vastness of space. So it is indeed a spaceship. But the one remarkable fact about spaceship Earth, this place that we call home, the spaceship that's hurtling through space around the mothership Sun, one remarkable thing about spaceship Earth is that no operation manual came along with it. And the the aspiration of human civilizations over the last 250,000 years, ever since the birth of the Homo sapiens sapiens, and especially since the dawn of agriculture, since we had the opportunity as a species to start investing our time outside of our immediate needs of food and shelter and safety, we could start investing in our futures. From that moment onwards, the aspiration of human civilization has been justice. Justice has been this beacon, this North Star that has guided all our movement towards. And here we have three wonderful young people of spaceship Earth that needs constant updating, that needs constant upgrading, and I really can't wait to hear from Disha, Vibha, and Suhaib on the tools that they are inventing to fill in the gaps of infrastructure of justice, to expand our our experience and possibility of justice, and to create a fully upgraded version of this operation manual of spaceship Earth that humanity has ever been creating. So we'll jump right into the conversation with Disha. And hooray! This the power is back here. Disha, hi. Thanks for joining in today. And I believe you are traveling as well.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about where you are and what you're doing there?
Yeah, I mean, just today's day is really overwhelming. I am not in Delhi. I am in Bikaner. I just flew to Bikaner in the afternoon. And this was for a case, a 2016 case where a 17-year-old Dalit girl, Delta Meghwal, was brutally raped, and her body was found in a water tank in the institutional premises of a teacher's training institute, actually. And the worst part is that when the body was found, the institutional authorities decided to take the deceased's body in a municipal corporation garbage carrying vehicle. That's how the body was carried, and this was in 2016. We in 2020 we saw Hathras, and we spoke about how there is no dignity in death. How the young girl in Hathras, how her body was cremated, the manner in which it was cremated, where the parents did not even get to see her in her last moment. So this is Delta Meghwal case. 6 years later, 2021, and today the verdict came out, and all three accused in the case have been convicted, and I have been associated with the case, and it's I mean, what a moment, because we're talking about justice today, and I've always wondered what justice is. And today I'd really like to sort of, I know how I'm feeling right now, because I met the father, I saw him cry in the court, and I think justice is a feeling. It's not an idea. Justice is not and it's not abstract. It's a feeling, and it's a feeling of um, being restored to your personhood, to your human self. And I could see that in Delta's father's eyes today. And I had to share this because we're talking about justice and justice makers. So yeah, that's about where I am.
And I can see the emotion flowing through you. I can see that there is you there is a deep personal experience uh, uh, that you are sharing in this moment. And my just want to know a little more about how did you participate in in this process of justice?
You mean the case, or like?
Yeah, how did you
Right.
did you
Yeah, so I came in touch with the lawyers and the family. So I'm not from Bikaner. I was not really arguing for or representing the family or the prosecution side. I was assisting them, and we drafted. I came at a really late stage. I came at the stage of written arguments, and we drafted written arguments. And we sort of did all the mumbo jumbo, that's required. There's a lot of getting the files out and reading them, helping and assisting the lawyers. So that is where we were at. I submitted the written submissions or written arguments in the case, the final argument, and that was my role. I came at a late stage, but yeah, but the feeling is nevertheless it's an immense feeling.
Amazing. I'll come back to you, Disha, and we'll talk more about your work at Seed. I want to ask Vibha. Vibha, you work with young people a lot, and uh, traditionally, for hundreds of thousands of years now, we have transmitted insights about fairness and human aspiration for justice through stories, through Panchtantra tales, and through stories about humans and animals, and that and looked at we've justice is really the first set of stories. That stories of justice are the first set of stories that you start acquiring as a child, through moral tales, because tales of morality are essentially tales of aspired justice, whether they've come in the form of social contracts or in form of law eventually. So how when you have to work with the complexity of modern human systems, which are replete uh, with such horrors as as Disha just shared with us. How do you make these frameworks? How do you make these realities accessible and uh, transmissible to young people?
Thanks, Anand, and thank you for sharing, Disha. I could feel the emotion coming from you, and I'm so incredibly happy that the word came out today. Thank you for sharing that with us. Anand, thank you for the question. When Disha was talking about the fact that justice needs to be something that's not abstract, I think that was the foundation of why I started Outlawed India, which is to make justice and make law something that's accessible to the common person. Um, and here's the thing about the law, right? Which is that I think the current issue isn't just one of treating justice and law as abstract. It's also one that we don't equip young people with the requisite tools to make justice accessible to them, which is to empower these individuals by giving them the tools and giving them the information to seek justice out for themselves in a society where it's unfair, that won't hand justice to them even when it's deserved. So I think making the law and making justice accessible comes in a couple of different forms. In my experience, when especially with young people, um, teaching them about the law has to come in an environment where they're comfortable, because the law, as you mentioned, is not just complex, but often involves a lot of concepts that are typically taboo in society, right? Whether we're talking about sexual harassment, whether we're talking about adolescent sexuality under the POCSO, there are several concepts that are incredibly taboo and not something that young individuals are used to hearing, because they're not in a society where it's acceptable to learn those things. In my experience, three things are incredibly important when you're making law and justice accessible to young people. First is a comfortable learning environment. And in my experience, language is possibly the most important tool in helping individuals learn about the law and learn about justice. Um, for example, the first ever class I took was regarding interactions with the police. So, for example, how do you file a complaint with the police? How do you follow up? Things like that. And I was to teach in Kannada, and I'm a Kannadiga. I've learned Kannada all my life thanks to my mother. And I taught in what I thought was adequate Kannada. And in my mind, I was teaching in an accessible manner. And I think that's where I tripped up, because I made accessibility about me instead of the audience that was actually receiving the information I was giving them. So things like saying the phrase Indian Penal Code in English as opposed to translating it to Kannada was a major hitch. So I do think that accessibility in terms of language especially is something that we need to be looking at more. And we've seen this time and time again, where legislations aren't put out in regional languages, where recommendations and feedback mechanisms for policies that have come out by the government, they're not published in regional languages, which means that it's not accessible to communities that don't speak English or Hindi. So coming out with and this is the mega picture, right? It starts at the ground level where you start teaching people in languages they're comfortable. But the larger picture is that our policies and laws need to be more language inclusive. The second thing in my experience in terms of making law and justice accessible is being able to create a cycle of accessibility. And this is where I really like the phrase each one teach one, right? Which is that if I teach you, Anand, today about a specific law or a tool that you can use to access justice, you need to be able to create a cycle where you go teach someone else about the law, which means that you not only need to be able to sit in a classroom and say XYZ about the law, you need to be able to kindle an interest and help them understand the relevance of the law to the point that they're willing to share their experiences with other individuals. And I think creating that cycle is really where we win. And the last thing, and this I learned from my mentor, Kuldeep. He works for an organization called Reap Benefit. The one thing I really learned about the law is trying to make it action oriented. The law is largely theoretical, and as a law student, I know that a little bit too well from all the exams that I've written. But being able to give the youth and being able to give young people action points. So, for example, we hosted something called the Right to Information Summit earlier this year, where we didn't just teach them about the Right to Information Act, right? What we actually got them to do was we got them to file RTIs. We showed them a template that they could use, and over the duration of 2 days, young people filed close to 200 right to information, and over 70% of those people had never filed a right to information application before. So not just teaching them about the theory, but giving them the tools to actually act on what we've taught them is, I think, an incredibly important part in actually making justice accessible to them.
That's really wonderful, Viva. I'm so inspired to hear that 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 there is that there is application woven into this pedagogy of, and this communication of justice that you're participating in, and that of course brings me to I do want to come back to you and ask you about the kind of tools, how these tools are transmitted exactly, and give me examples of stories and anecdotes and illustrations and the materiality of this transmission, because it's I'm very curious, honestly, to understand how can you take something as abstract as and sometimes very counterintuitive as law and justice. It's not the most intuitive paradigm always, and I would love to know how you take insights and ideas that may be counterintuitive and convert them into stories that can be transmitted. So I'd love to come back to you, but that of course brings me to Suhaib, who also speaks to a large number of people, but in a slightly different language, in a completely different uh, methodology. And you use Suhaib, you use art and photographic art at that to transmit ideas of justice and to equip people with tools of justice. I'd love to know what that means. There is, of course, this relationship between art and justice is as old as human thought. The first principles of justice were painted on cave walls, really, and hence I think this is an ancient relationship. It's an ancient as ancient as this aspiration is, really. So I would love to know how you have found this tool to be useful and how you've been using it.
Okay. Thank you so much, Anand, for this question. And I would like to start by saying that when Disha said that, justice is not an idea, it's an emotion. And I could really relate it to it, because my journey with justice started. I fell in love with the concept of justice because I was hearing this, since childhood, that there was this time when uh, we were about to lose everything. It was my maternal grandfather's case. And actually, he, being a literate man, he gave a guarantee to someone who turned out to be a fraud. And then for almost 10 years, I was listening to this phrase that we are going to lose everything, the property, everything, because bank was about to seize everything. And then after a long legal battle, Chief Court, Jammu High Court, passed the landmark judgment, and passed the justice. And I saw justice and fell in love with that, the notion, and it was like an emotion for me. So thank you, Disha, for sharing that. Now, I guess how I transfused art and law is because when I entered law school, so I have always been a kid who never followed the herd mentality. So my parents wanted me to pursue engineering, but I told them, sorry, I can't, follow the herd mentality, and I want to pursue law. But when I entered law school, when my this legal journey started, uh, the legal system, I would love to give you the analogy, like it was like the legal system was standing there like Amitabh Bachchan passing a dialogue of mohabbatein, parampara, pratishtha, and anushasan. So right from the start, we were like, sorry, this is the way you have to think. You cannot think beyond the box. You cannot implement the creative ways. What's being taught to you, you have to learn. Rote learning, everything was there. So I was like, uh, still cannot follow the herd mentality. So, and then Vibha said, about the language, the accessibility, the relation of language with the accessibility. She's absolutely right, because being a lawyer, I could not understand law in its entirety because I was not able to interpret. So I was like, maybe I did not follow the forms of law. So I incorporated art, and I used my photography skills uh, to show what really justice means by bringing the subjects into the frame, because law has been reduced to documents, law has been reduced to statutes, law has been reduced to bare acts. So I was like, maybe we can bring the human emotion, and that's the relationship of human emotion with justice. So I was able to transfuse art and law to demystify the legal jargons. And I would love to show later on how I was able to do it.
Love to see love to see some examples of that for sure. So why don't you share right away,
Oh,
and then in the meantime, yeah, why don't you start sharing what you use, and
yeah,
the images that you use to
yes.
share ideas on justice. In the meantime, I want you guys to, um, as Suhaib loads his slides, I would love to even really inquire now that I'm meeting all three of you and we are talking about justice. Um, l- like like we explored in the conversation so far, that uh, uh, there is this reiteration of justice being an emotional experience, and an experience of the experience received emotionally. Uh, but again, that to my mind challenges my understanding of justice, and I would love to hear from Disha and Vibha and Suhaib about what is your definition of justice. Is it truly an emotional experience, or is there an objective standard? Is there a standard of appropriation? Is there a standard of or is there an aspiration of a collective standard that is not only qualitative emotionally but also quantifiable? I'd love to know what you think, Disha and Viva and Suhaib. Once we come back to you, then you can also take us through your slides.
Sure.
Yeah, Anand, thanks for that question. It's an amazing question. And whether it's quantifiable or not, it's definitely quantifiable. But my relationship with law and justice has been quite weird, awkward, forced, and artificial. And talk a little bit about that. Usually law is a vocation that probably people would choose. But I come from a community where that it wasn't a choice. And I come from a denotified tribal community. And I call myself Vimukta. So my community and my people were criminalized by law. So this whole idea of law being good or modern law being good does not resonate with me. People usually take up law as a vocation because there's a sort of love for law, probably, or modern law. But my relationship with law has been the other way around. I took up law because I hated law. I hated what law did to humans, right, and how unjust it was. An entire swathes of people and communities, 200 tribes, were criminalized by one piece of legislation, and criminalized at birth by the 1871 Criminal Tribes Act, right? And these communities continue to face criminal stigma, state persecution, police atrocities of the highest order, even today. And for me, it's not a choice. So my understanding of justice, I have not, the fact that this whole ascribed, status of being criminal, being branded a criminal at birth, that has stayed with me. It continues to stay with me and my people. And therefore, that feeling of justice is not there. And therefore, the whole relationship between law and justice, that law does justice or law is good, it doesn't resonate with me. When people are, we are sort of a country that is obsessed with law. We love law. We are a law thirsty nation. Something happens, some violation, we want a law, right? I'm like, no law, please no law, because it does more harm than good. So I come from the other side, actually. And my association with the field of law is Therefore, it is, in a way to sort of transform, reform, and change how we look at law, right? And how we look at justice. And justice doesn't necessarily come by way of law or what we understand as retributive law. There is preventive justice, there is retributive justice, there is reformative justice, and all these forms of justice exist, right? But we are too focused on only one kind of retributive eye for an eye kind of a justice system, right? Not to say that it is not important for people who are victimized, not to say that retributive justice is not important. But I, as a Vimukta woman, really believe that there is this whole gamut of justice, that we haven't explored, especially in India. We need to work towards that. Of course, I'll come to see it because Vibha has spoken about outlawed, and Suhaib has spoken about locktopus. I'll talk about seed, but for me, my engagement with law and justice is therefore this. It's definitely not abstract. It's definitely quantifiable, but it's a feeling is also not abstract. Feelings are real, emotions are real, and they
Wow,
might not.
Disha,
Yeah.
you opened up so many questions in my head. I'm just absolutely amazed to hear what you have to say about this. There have been, of course, questions already from audiences about retributive justice, about restorative reformative justice systems as well, and we'd come to that. But I really want to know what that means. What do you mean by this new approach and by this non-policy, non-law driven approach of justice? How do you think uh, that can manifest? Where can that come from? Does that come from a decentralized system of decision making? As a Vimukta woman, I really think that you are probably the best person to answer so many questions that I have in my head suddenly about systems of decision making and systems of social contracts. So please just give us a little bit of a teaser of what that framework looks like.
So from this very modernist colonial ethnocentric lens, we have a very set notion of how law and the legal system is. But I'm a Vimukta woman, I'm an Adivasi woman, and if you see the tribal society, you will know that tribal societies have been the most civilized societies in a sense that they are not talking about death penalty. It is us, the so-called civilized, the mainstream society, that is talking about death penalty and bloodthirsty laws. Tribal societies have had, communitarian systems, and ways in which such decisions can be taken. At the most, the maximum that one, the maximum punishment that one faces in a tribal society is probably, you will be outcast or, ostracized, or, you will not be a part of the community, but you will not be killed, you will not be lynched, you will not be thrown into a prison that's atrocious, like a system that incarcerates you. So there are these ways, and I think the manner in which the very organic mechanical solidarity that you see in tribal societies, that kind of solidarity in delivering justice is something that we will have to look at. Again, all of this sounds very abstract, but believe me, we will have to have more conversations. I don't have all the answers, but we will have to have more conversations about how would preventive justice look like, how would reformative justice look like, what are the other options that we have.
Absolutely, Disha. I think you opened up an area of inquiry which is extremely vast and incredibly important and urgent to navigate. I would love to come back to you, and if you can think of an example where tribal communities that you are aware of have used methodologies towards preventive and reformative systems. I'd love to know if there are insights and knowledge systems that we have at our disposal that we have not absorbed into our justice frameworks. Suhaib, you have your slideshow ready. Why don't you take us through what you've been doing?
Yeah, sure. And since you asked the question, Anand, that what would the justice mean to me? And I would love to answer by saying that, uh, I would talk in the sense of an erstwhile state, Jammu and Kashmir, because I am from Jammu. I know now we have a union territory of Jammu Kashmir and union territory of Ladakh, but I would love to talk in terms of erstwhile. So I guess I have seen justice varying in a particular region also. The interpretation of justice completely change its uh, understanding. So for example, I am from Jammu and I have seen justice. Like I've given you the anecdote for that. So for me, justice is like an hope, might be possible. And for a Kashmiri, I'm not stereotyping or generalizing, but most of them, they would laugh at me when they hear this word. And for Ladakh, justice means empowerment, like the work Sonam Wangchuk is doing there. So I guess that's how I have interpreted justice, that it varies from, region to region. Uh, Coming back to this in camera, and Unpad Vakil, this is my project. So yes, like for example, this, I used a hand of a small fisherman to show the concept of joint liability. I was not able to understand, and I used this to have a conversation starter. I exhibited this in schools. I exhibited this in law schools to have a conversation. Can we think law like this? Then we have this. I used steam coming out of kettle to show a concept that is not being taught. And it's important. Like your whistle is protected under Whistleblower Protection Act. But we are not talking about it. Then this. Some goodbyes are the hardest. And it's really hardest when you're migrating, when you are a refugee. So I used this. I used art to show what it means. We read articles around exploitation, but how far can you run from exploitation? This was a tribal child, really scared. We have a right to food. Do we? Or we have a right to hunger? Because this child was crying and all he could eat was a bit chunk, which was also, here under his lips. And then this. We are talking about copyrights, we are talking about patents, we are talking about trade secrets. But what about traditional knowledge? I think we need to think about that as well. So I think now I might have been, been able to show how I have transfused art and law to basically have a conversation. Let's have a conversation. Before directly jumping to the justice, let's have a conversation around it. And yes,
I can see these are wonderful icebreakers and entry points into some of the conversations you want. And what happens next? Like when you go out to young people and young students, how do these conversations transpire? What are the highlights? Give us a taste of that. These are wonderful icebreakers. They are emotional. They're experientially. They're visceral. They immediately put a human face to uh, otherwise. Complex ideas, otherwise ideas that can get lost in abstraction. So how does that really unravel? I'd be very curious to know that.
Yes. So the first question is, tell us more about it. So I get this, like, tell us something about more. How is this different from what we are being taught? So I tell them, and then they also come up with their own perspective. Like they think that they can also now connect the dots, what they were not thinking beyond the law books. So I guess, yes, I've been able to, start the conversation and have, tell them that yes, it's possible to think law beyond books and statutes.
Great. So that's exactly again, Vibha, the uh, purpose of your organization. This is something that you have deeply invested your time in doing as well. How do you think it is received? How do you think these insights and ideas, when told through illustrations, when told through stories, how are they received by young people? Do you have any examples, any anecdotes to share with us?
So, Anand, I actually want to start with the question that you asked, Disha, and I'll just weave my way to your current question about the relationship between emotion and justice and law. And I remember stepping into law school, I remember conceptualizing the law and justice as something that's cold and devoid of emotion and all about rationality and things like that. But I think the one thing that we often forget is how the ideas of justice and law have the power to evoke emotions. And we saw that from Disha today, right? When Disha shared with us about her experiences. And I think the power that comes with emotions is collective action, which is to say that when you realize that a law has been passed by the government that does not act to the benefit of citizens, or you realize that there's a law that's to be passed and that's not acting to the benefit of citizens. I think what justice provides you with is a metric. And the reason that emotions become important is that that's the driving factor which allows you to work with your community. And I think that's why it's so important, which is the ability of emotion to shape communities to achieve their ideas. The important part is, as everything else, ideas of law and justice are transient, they're constantly changing, which means that the emotions that come with it are also constantly to weave your emotions into collective action that allows you to be active in terms of how their standards of how they want to treat their members, benefits that the members are getting from the state. I think that's where emotion really comes in, which means that when we create tools for people to access law and justice, we need to be adequately aware that those tools need to be able to evoke emotions from people to have them act strongly about the law and justice, right? And I think that's where it stops being abstract. Of course, we have ideas that feelings and emotions are all abstract concepts. But the point at which it stops being abstract is when you see people out on the street protesting laws, protesting decisions by the government because they know that it's wrong. And I think that's where the idea that emotions are incredibly abstract and have no place in the law sort of really falls apart. And getting to your question about the kind of impacts that I've seen, I want to share a couple of instances. When we first started Outlawed India, and it is a completely student-run initiative, so everything from our content to our website creation to anything that goes up on social media, all of it is student-created, including our teachers. And the one really incredible thing that I realized is that students that we were teaching, so school students that we were teaching, were willing to be a lot more open with us because the age gap between the instructor and the student was significantly lesser, which means that they were able to talk about issues that would otherwise possibly not be acceptable to talk about in schools. The second incredible impact that I've seen is students who attend these sessions often come back telling us that they want to be involved in law and justice, which I think personally has been my biggest win, because the more that you get students interested, and I think that's crucial. The law is often seen as something that's too heavy and something that's too boring to capture the interest of the common citizen. I think the win is when you get young students to think that the law and justice is something worth investing their time in. And you don't need to be a lawyer, or you don't need to be working in an NGO that involves itself with law and justice to be involved. All it takes is an interest. And I think that's where we try to do what Suhaib is doing so beautifully. We're coming out, for example, right now with a booklet called Jagrati, in my mother tongue, Kannada, that translates to a sense of awareness. And my mother actually coined the name for us. So thank you to her for that. We're coming out with a booklet called Jagriti for government school students in Karnataka, which teaches the law in an interactive way. So it has stories, it has conversations, it has characters that have been sketched by a wonderful artist who's also currently a college student, where we're reducing the law to its barest form, to the way that we want students to understand it, which is not something that's boring and has too many unnecessarily long words that even lawyers don't understand. It's the most accessible form in a way that keeps them interested, in that it has quizzes, it has discussions, it allows them to connect with their peers about the law. So I think the goal of what we're trying to do here doesn't stop at trying to create awareness. It starts there, but it continues on to try to create a community of individuals who are invested in law and justice in their own ways, where they don't have to be lawyers or judges to be involved in law and justice, just that they have to be a citizen who's invested in the good for themselves and for the good of society and willing to take action. So I think that's where I think emotions are also incredibly important, to be able to get people interested and invested in creating that kind of change.
Can you give, because I'd be very curious to know what do these tools look like?
Sure. Anand, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. So these tools can look like a bunch of different things. So for example, when we conducted the Right to Information Summit earlier in 2021, we were very aware of the fact that a lot of individuals participating probably had never filed an RTI before. So we provided them with a template, which they could actually use to file an RTI. So it had all the details. So things like their name, their address, the way in which they'd like to receive the information. So just simplifying the process for them, because a lot of the times, the reason that people don't act on provisions available to them, or tools that are probably a little harder to access, is simply because of that, which is that it's often too complex to access, or they're simply not willing to take an additional step to make use of something like the right to information provisions. So we created a template which was really simple to use. So all they had to do was fill in their details, fill in what they wanted information on, and upload it onto the relevant RTI portal, whether that was their state portal or the central portal. They just had to do that. Alternatively, other tools also look like creating formats on how you can file complaints with the police. Because we've often noticed, even if it's something as simple as losing your bus on a wallet or losing your cell phone, to more serious issues that come up in your life, people often don't know how to interact with the police and with other authorities. So giving them a framework within which they can do that, to make that accessible and make it less intimidating, right? Because I think that's the goal of these tools, to just make accessing the law and accessing people involved with law and justice less intimidating. Speaking with a police officer is not easy, and I'm saying this as a law student. So for someone who's not interacted with police officials before or other individuals, it can be quite intimidating. And other tools that are less to do with formats are tools of community building. One of the first programs that we started with Outlawed India was a shared space that students could curate to come talk about issues that were important to them. For example, we had a whole session that was led on women regarding pornography and the law and the impact that it has on women. So curating those spaces is incredibly important, because it gives people a shared sense of being, right? Where they're able to have a place for a dialogue, where they're speaking to their peers about things that are important to them. And at the same time, knowing that they're part of a community that has similar feelings, or that has different feelings from what they do, but knowing that they're part of that community. So giving them that shared sense of feeling and giving them that sense of belonging is another important factor that I think we brought about with this student created space.
Okay, that's very insightful, Vibha. To create a sense of community, you said, and to create a sense of community for young people and especially in urban environments who may be coming from very different and diverse contexts. And in case of Disha, that's the point of origin, in fact, the community, the idea that there is a shared experience of being marginalized and even criminalized for belonging to a certain community, and hence a shared experience already present in that context. My question in that case, Disha, is the question that I'd asked earlier of you, which is what kind of paradigms, what kind of frameworks have you been able to inherit from these indigenous knowledge systems for making decisions? Disha, you're on mute, I think.
Yeah, coming to you. I think also looking at crime and criminality, just the idea of it. In indigenous communities, and this is contentious, there are caste panchayats. And the reason for caste panchayats or panchayats of the community has largely been because the modern criminal justice system, and like Vibha was talking about how police, and it's very difficult to talk to police and all of that. There is an insidious presence of police in the lives of indigenous communities, right? And an insidious presence of the criminal justice system. It's almost like the everydayness of the criminal justice system. You experience it if you come from an indigenous community. And so, it's obviously criminalizing you. It's incarcerating you. It's violating you, right? It's not a criminal justice system that will deliver justice to you, and you know that, right? And when you know that, you try to create alternative systems, right? That are communitarian, right? And these panchayats have actually served as those alternative systems. They have, been criticized for a lot of reasons. Especially the upper caste panchayats, and I'm not talking about upper caste panchayats, where the whole honor killing and all these issues come up. But these panchayats amongst indigenous communities, they really play a role. They play the role of this whole idea or sense of justice, or the sense of being restored, as a community. And decisions are taken by the community. Crime or an offense is really not a crime against an individual, but it is seen as a crime or an offense against the community as a whole, where you disrupt the balance of the community as a whole, right? And therefore the responsibility and the accountability is not of an individual, right? Or a system, but the responsibility and accountability lies with the community, right? So these kind of, like I said, one of the things or punishments that is often given in instances of offenses within tribal societies is that the person will be ostracized, will be put out of the tribe or the community, right? And that's the maximum punishment, because he or she has disturbed the balance of the community, and the community takes the responsibility. It's not an individual that takes the responsibility of what has happened. The community takes the responsibility of restoring the victim, or the survivor in that case, right? Of helping them, of supporting them, right? Whereas, when it comes to the modern criminal justice system, it's very, very individual based. People are targeting the so-called criminal, the accused, like they are not party to what is happening, right? They are not contributing to that kind of, the committal of the offense is the last stage. But what is happening is, I'll just give an example of the boys' locker room case, and everyone, when it happened, everyone was like, these boys need to be punished and this and that, for the comments that they were making, and the chats, etc. But these are the same people who have been sexual predators, sexual harassers in their day-to-day lives. They are sharing really misogynistic, sexist messages on WhatsApp on a daily basis, right? So they are not taking accountability, but we all as a society want to find that one criminal that we can punish, so that we can get rid of our burden and of our responsibility. So, tribal societies are different in that sense. For them, justice is about community, crime and criminality or offense is about community, right? And therefore there is a community accountability, a community sense of accountability, and therefore a community sense of justice. Yeah. Have I answered your question?
Yes, you have. But I'd still love to know how these decisions you think can be taken, and what kind of gaps can be filled in decision making. Because to my mind, they still don't seem to be as much in contradiction of each other, as you're suggesting. So I'm still trying to understand what you mean by this contradiction, because to me the state responds in a very similar framework. The state looks at crime as a crime upon the state. A crime upon individual is also seen as a crime upon the state, and that's why state intervenes even when there is no uh, uh, even if victim does not choose to press charges. The state intervenes in cases of such crimes, and the state also takes a communal responsibility towards restoring justice. For the state pays in some ways to the victim as well. So it's kind of continuous from the tribe to the state mindset, as I see it. And exile is also one of the many techniques of retributive justice that the state deploys, uh, the, among other techniques. But of course, at the scale of state, it exile can mean just a discontinuity and disconnection from active engagement with the society, which becomes the prison, of course, which comes with its own set of challenges and problems at scale, and that these are problems of scale, more than challenges of worldview. I feel that the worldview is more continuous. So I just want to understand what you mean by this contradiction between the state,
And
modern systems, and yeah. Sorry.
yeah, so Anand, when you talk about the state, I feel that obviously there's the social contract, all of that, and it's a democratic polity, right, which is supposedly participated. But the state is also the source of injustice. One needs to understand it in that sense. The state is not all good and normative. And when the state takes up your right, the state takes up the case on behalf of the victim, the individual, right? And we believe in an adversarial system. But if you one just remembers what happened in Hathras, and how the incidents unfolded. It was the state, it was the police machinery of the state that was doing what it was doing, right? That did not allow the mother and the parents to even see the child and perform their last rites, right? Or it was the state that was making really problematic remarks. It was the DYSP who was saying that there is no rape, and making all these kind of judgments on the victim, right? So in fact, it is the state that one needs to question what is this idea of state, and is it all good and is it all nice? And again, who constitutes that state? Who is it, and who is in power? When you say that state is an entity and it's this abstract entity, there are people behind it, right? And who are participating, who are the decision makers rather, of that state entity. And there you will see that it is the existing entrenched power structures of patriarchy, of caste, of uh, uh, um, uh, uh, class that are operating, right? And these are the people who are making decisions and trying. In fact, the state also acts as a tool to maintain status quo, and that status quo is an unjust status quo where millions are marginalized, where millions are not having the so-called just kind of life, or that they ought to have. So one needs to also question what the state is and what this law is. And again, I have always maintained that law is casteist, and law really, even with a sense of the modern normative law, it is who are the people who are ensuring, and who are in charge of the justice system. Who are these actors in the justice system? Whether it's the police, whether it's the medical officer who records evidences, how the investigation happens, who is sitting there in the forensics lab recording what, right? Who are the judges? Who are the prison officials? All of this matters, right? And that's where SEED comes in. We at SEED believe that the legal system will not be just if it is not representative. And we truly believe that, I am a product of, I've been a diversity candidate, right? I've been everywhere people want me as a diversity candidate. And let me say that right now. And I am the beneficiary of the reservation system. Had it not been reservations, I wouldn't have been here right now speaking to you. So for me, I know what that means. Reservation and due representation really means that all these voices come to the fore, right? And I have believed in that. When I came to the Supreme Court and I started practicing in the Supreme Court at the seniors chambers, I realized that I actually represent 15% of the population. And I can't find another woman or man like me from my community. And that's, and then the way in which it has been normalized, that, a few privileged, a few from the oppressor communities consume the entire space that is responsible for justice. That in itself was it gave me an eerie feeling, that how is it so normal that this entire space, the legal profession, the judiciary is consumed by people in oppressive positions. And how are they ever going to challenge the status quo? How are they ever going to challenge, these unjust structures, right? So that is where SEED came in, and we really believe that through SEED we want to create an inclusive, a duly representative legal profession and the judiciary as well. And what we are doing through SEED is we sort of realize that as law students, this is something that I had experienced, that the entire legal profession works on networks, right? And what are these networks? These are caste networks. These are networks. I mean, how many, we need to ask ourselves, how many, especially those from the oppressor classes, how many Bahujans do you know? And by Bahujans, I mean 85%, they constitute the 85% of the population, right? So we need to ask ourselves if we know even, from amongst our close circles, do we know people like that, right? So starting from there, one needs to understand that all the networks in the legal profession are caste networks, and they're upper caste networks. They're hegemonized by upper caste. And one of the biggest hurdles that I, as a law student, faced in internships or in getting internships was this, in my law school years, is that I did not know, right? And not knowing is not a simple thing. Not knowing is really a structural barrier, right? I do not know because I come from a certain social location, right? And there is a structural systemic barrier here. And, the work that Vibha is doing or Suhaib is doing is literally that, that they are trying to cross that barrier, right? Vibha spoke about language and how that serves as a barrier. It is a structural barrier. It's not just any barrier, right? And it is doing a systemic, proper job of maintaining a certain oppressive status quo, right? Adivasi is not being able to access the legal system. Not anyone in the legal system, the lawyers, the PPs, anyone does not know Gondi, for example, if you're in Bastar or Chhattisgarh, right? And you come to the court and you have been arrested because you are obviously tribal, you're Adivasi. And one of the first things is within 24 hours, you should be brought before the court, the magistrate, right? And the first thing that one of the first things that the court would ask is, are you okay? Is there some kind of torture happening in police custody? And for an Adivasi man or a woman to not be able to understand the judge's language, because they only know Gondi, that kind of that kind of system and that structure is really hopeless. Imagine that language is actually ensuring that you do not get justice. So if a police has beaten you up in custody and the legal system on paper has ensured that you go before the magistrate and you tell the magistrate that I am being harassed, I'm being tortured, I'm being raped in police custody, language is serving as a barrier, and you are not able to tell the judge about what is happening with you, and you are sent to the same unjust cell police custody, right? So this is something that one needs to really talk about. So this is what we are doing through SEED. Sorry, I diverted a bit. So SEED is ensuring that these internships.
Not at all, Disha. It's in fact everything you're saying is Sorry,
Yeah.
no, everything,
Yeah.
not at all. I'm saying everything you're saying is has been incisive and precise and absolutely eye-opening. So please go ahead. Tell us what Seed is doing.
Yeah. So we are ensuring that these networks that have been hegemonized, and these networks that are upper caste networks, that we are trying to break those. And we are trying to ensure that Bahujan students also have access to networks. And we will create those networks for Bahujan students, right? And we are trying to do that. We at Seed right now have around 100 empaneled lawyers, at the Supreme Court, High Court, lawyers, law firms, legal organizations who have committed to us to Seed, and they're providing internships to at least one Bahujan student in a year, and these internships are paid. So we ensured that these internships are paid, because we know as law students, you don't really hear of paid internships. So we just started in January, right? Our launch event was on the 14th of April. And we managed to give out around 45 internships. And these are all Bahujan students coming from really marginalized backgrounds. 50%, 60% of them are women from Bahujan communities. There are Pasmanda communities, students from Pasmanda communities as well. There are trans gender persons. There are people identifying as gender non-binaries as well. And we've ensured that these students, within 6 months time, it wasn't that much, that these 40-50 students got these internships. Many of them have completed their internships. That for some of them, they've written to us saying that this was my first paid internship. Someone has written, this was my first internship because I was never able to even get through to a lawyer, or through even get a reply from a lawyer to my internship application email. So just like really wonderful response. So that is one major aspect. Why internships? Because internships really are for all law students would know this, and lawyers would know this, that they really expose you to the legal professional stream, right? Therefore, we are starting out with internships, but we're also ensuring that we get more into the employment sector as well. And, we are able to secure some positions for young Bahujan lawyers as well. So that is one aspect of C. The other aspect is we are focusing on capacity building. That is also something that Vibha is already doing. Loctopus is also trying to do that. Through Seed, we are creating modules, and these are modules on something as basic as how to conduct legal research. Something as basic as, when you enter, we in fact designed a recent module is about soft skills, right? I know that when I was in a seniors chamber, that was the first chamber I worked in, and it took me almost a week or 10 days to even strike a conversation with a senior. Whereas I was seeing, like, privileged class interns. I was an employee, but there were interns who would just walk into the seniors room, say hi, strike a conversation, very confidently do that, right? And I was not able to do that, and it really shook my confidence. And I do not want other students like me to face that, right? So we sort of created this module on soft skills, just how to write emails, of how to strike a conversation, and we've done that in some 8 languages. CJLS at Jinder Grubel Law School, they've helped us in translating it to 8 languages, and we have a proper soft skills module that has been prepared by students for students, right? So this is something that we've done. We've designed a module on how to write a CV, how to prepare a CV. And that's, I realized that with Bahujan students, one of the biggest things is not having that confidence, even if you have that kind of work, just to be able to put that on paper. So to give them that confidence, to be able to tell them that you can put all these things, and there is work experience there. And so we've conducted workshops on how to prepare CV, how to prepare cover letters, how to apply to scholarships abroad for an LLM. I've seen the confidence with most Savannah students is this, that immediately after they complete their LLB, they're applying for scholarships abroad. And we realize that we should be giving this information out and making this information about scholarships accessible to students, Bahujan students. And we conducted almost a week-long workshop on that. So these are the kind of like modules that we are creating. We have a community of around 300 Bahujan students, law students from across India at this point. We hope to do more work. There is also some work that we are doing. In fact, I'm very excited about that. A research, a report that is going to come out. It's a completely student-led report on the obstacles and hurdles that Bahujan students faced during the pandemic. Because the entire education system just went online in one go, and it really had disproportionate impact on Bahujan students. So we've ensured that that students lead this kind of research and report writing. So we'll soon come out with something of that sort, and just research, advocacy, ensuring representation. Yeah, that is what SEED is. And SEED stands for Community for Eradication of Discrimination in Education and Employment. But most importantly, the word seed means seed your capital, seed your social capital, seed your economic capital, because otherwise, we can't imagine a just society. Yeah.
Absolutely incredible. Your insights and your are incisive and very powerful, Disha. Thank you so much for sharing them. It's my mind is open with so many questions, and I can see the possibilities of the impact possibilities of work of this kind, of eradicating hegemonies and challenging them, and using the infrastructure towards presentation for better use of infrastructure that exists, and creating the next set of questions I have for all of you, and then we'll open it up for audiences, which is representation seems like the chronic problem. The lack of representation clearly is the chronic problem with the existing manifestation of justice in the region, and clearly it's the way you propose this premise, Disha. It doesn't seem only chronic; it seems like the most acute problem as well. And to that, my question is, of course, there is the tools that you have already started building with soft skill building and creating platforms of dialogue and possibilities and opportunities for young people who do not have access to opportunities easily. So and hence create opportunities of expanding representation. What are the other tools? What are the other infrastructural tools, and how can others participate? How can people outside of legal community, people coming from, that's a revolution we saw with other industries. We saw that in healthcare, we saw that in wellness, we saw that in we saw that in media, in communication systems. We've seen people coming from in even in science communication and scientific enterprises. We've seen people coming out of extremely different and unprecedented spaces of areas of work, contributed very severely and majorly to some of these enterprises, human enterprises. So what can people do? How can what gaps need to be filled, and what can others do in helping filling up these infrastructural gaps?
Yeah. So Anand, the question is for me, right? Yeah. What are the other?
Right now, the question is for all of you. I would love.
Because I've spoken so much, I really wish I want to give the space to others. I'd come back to it. But yeah.
Thanks, Disha. Would have loved to hear you speak either way, but I think there are a couple of things that I can think of that we've been doing, and of course, I'm still only 21 and I do have limited experience in this. But I think the first thing is getting people involved. And I think that's where it really starts. And when I say getting people involved, I don't just mean um, a very surface level interaction with law and justice. I do mean getting into the depth of law and justice. So, for example, what we're doing right now, as I'm sure you're all aware, earlier this year there was a wave of sexual harassment allegations against school officials that school children came out with and said this has been happening to us in schools, and schools aren't adequately helping us through the process. And I think that's where it starts. Right now, what Outlawed India is doing is something called Project Safe Schools, which is a two-part project where we're getting students in schools to fill out a survey regarding the resources and capabilities of their schools to deal with sexual harassment, to understand the kind of resources available to help students in these circumstances. And the second part of this program, which is where I really think involvement comes through, is coming up with a set of guidelines for schools to follow in terms of how to deal with sexual harassment, the kind of resources that you need to have available on campus and on school to be able to help students through this process. And of course, familiarizing them with laws like POCSO and other general sexual harassment laws. So when I say that the kind of tools we need to talk about, I think we need to start with making involvement something that people want to do, which means that you need to start small. So whether it's getting students to fill out a survey on sexual harassment in their schools, or getting students to write out a small post on a law that they think isn't it doesn't benefit society. I think it needs to start with young people, because the reason that's so important is unless you embed the idea of involving yourself in law and justice at a really young age, it isn't something that you can just turn on at the snap of a finger when you're much older, right? Which means that your ability to act on injustices and your ability to act on things that are wrong need to be embedded in you from a very young age, which means that you need to be able to empower young people to understand that they aren't just observers, right? And this is something that we see day in and day out. And Disha spoke about how especially students from marginalized sections find it incredibly hard to find internships or incredibly hard to be involved in legal spaces. And that carries on, which is to say that your ability to insert yourself into an environment that was clearly never built for you is incredibly difficult as and when you go on, which means that inserting yourself into these environments needs to start as young as you being in school, which means that you need to have the tools to empower yourself to be in those kinds of environments where you've been historically left out. And I think that starts small. I don't think it necessarily starts with a lecture on like Hobbes or Locke or like anything like that. I think it starts as small as what are things in your community that impact you. And I think that's where we've been losing out on the essence of the law, which is that we've depersonalized it so much, which is to say that we understand the law as people sitting in the parliament and like yelling and throwing chairs at each other, whereas the law is really about how you interact with other people, right? And that's really where we need to start with our understanding of the law, which is to get children to understand the law from the perspective of how does this impact you? How does this impact your loved ones? And if it's impacting you adversely, what can you do about it? And when we teach the law and when we teach justice, one thing that we need to do better is teaching people about recourses. When we think about the law, we often frame it negatively, right? Which is to say that we understand law and justice in terms of what you can't do. What we need to be doing more of is telling children and telling students what you can do, what you have a right to, the fact that you have a right to education, the fact that you have a right to shelter, the fact that you have a right to food. These are positive rights and tools that we need to be telling individuals instead of just framing the law as something negative in terms of things that you can't be doing, right? Which means we need to be talking to young people more, not just about positive rights they have, but also to help them understand that the responsibility is on them to secure these rights for those who may be marginalized and people who may not be able to access these rights because of historical inequalities. And as Disha said, to be able to seed it, right? So I do think that it starts as young as being able to talk to school children about the law and about recourses available to you. And I think that's where it really all starts.
Wow, that's a really powerful idea, Vibha. Thank you so much for that. That the idea to reiterate that recourse is accessible, and even though we know that there are challenges and there are infrastructural challenges and there are challenges of representation, like Disha mentioned, it's an extremely powerful idea to reiterate that a part of it still works, and a part of it is accessible to you. Um, and I think that's really powerful. Suhaib?
Yeah, so Anand, since you asked about the different industries, how they can contribute, I would love to say that I would love to see more content because it is consumed by the young audience. See more content from your industry. Like I would like to, propose that there should be more legal series. And those series should not be the cliched series. They should talk about what Disha and Vibha have just spoken, like the behind the scenes of the law, make people more aware about the situation, what's happening around law. So I guess, and we have seen the trend, like after although there was this media consumption from Tariq pe Tariq, but after Jolly LLB, we are seeing this trend that after every two, 3 movies, there is a movie focusing on a law subject. And it's like I see it on a positive note that in India we came to know about the concept of consent only when Amitabh Bachchan delivered the dialogue, no means no. But at least it started a conversation. Let's look on the brighter side. So I think we can have help from the entertainment field, and we can incorporate ideas and produce content which can definitely help in increasing the legal awareness.
Absolutely. I think I do imagine that there is some impact that mainstream media and mainstream discourse manages to have on the belief systems of people here in this region. And but I spend more days doubting the potential for impact that mainstream media in this country has than believing in it. So it's good that you are hopeful and have some faith in the possibility that mainstream media in this region has. We have been telling Bollywood has been making stories about the freedom to love anyone you want for a century now, and somehow it has managed to not impact behavior at scale. And maybe that behavior shift is so minuscule that it's not invisible to the eye. Unless you look at statistics, and I haven't seen the statistics, I don't know if there is an impact. But yes, the to reiterate insights and insights that are coming from you guys, to reiterate um, uh, ideas and possibilities that are to be gathered from your work using mainstream discourse is going to be one of the many things that can be done for sure, I think. And I I don't share the same optimism and faith that you do, Suhaib, in the mainstream discourse
No,
makers in this region yet.
I
It's
have
only
faith that
because
we will have more Anand Gandhis. I have.
yeah. So and that, I mean, that's another conversation I would love to have with you guys someday, which is about yeah, the emotionality of it. The moment you rely on emotions, it invariably starts taking us in directions that are parochial, that are often primitive, that are often driven by sentiments and sensations of groups versus groups. The aspiration of the collective system is to synthesize extremely diverse groups together, and we fail at that aspiration every time we do not represent groups sufficiently, and that's why state machineries fail, because of the hegemonies of one group uh, taking uh, taking everything to themselves, and winners take it all, and they keep taking it all, and then uh, there is a complete absence of representation of that diversity that was the original aspiration. And hence, when diversity fails, when representation fails, everything else starts falling apart. But the challenge with emotionality still that I keep coming upon is, as you see in Hindi films and mainstream films in India, that there is a call for retributive justice. There is a call for only one form of justice, which is the most primitive kind, which is emotional, which is to do with vengeance and revenge, and which is to do with the celebration of the parochial, which is to do with the celebration of the identity at birth, and not of the dissolving of that identity into a larger whole. So these are some of the narrative challenges, and these are the only stories that seem to work. The other unfortunate thing about media is that it's always driven by the many. It's driven by the most primitive ideas. I mean, if you look at mainstream media anywhere in the world, it has not even come close to uh, one essay that you guys would write, you guys would sleepwalk through writing. I'm sure if Disha were to just write an essay right now, it would be a million times more sophisticated than all mainstream media discourse put together. And that's the other limitation that mainstream media has, and which is to have to always cater to the most primitive and the most universal emotions of people, which are often again at uh, uh, often counter intuitive to what the aspiration of justice may be, which is synthesis, which is representation, which is not parochial, which is not driven by a desire for retribution, and which is driven by a desire for restoration, desire for equity and social equity, which are more complex ideas. And that's really I see that more in your work. And maybe there has to be, I'm sorry I'm taking up so much of the time, but maybe there is a way that we can learn from all of you, like I'm learning today. It's been an extremely inspiring conversation for me, to hear all of you, and the precision and the incisiveness with which you have presented your ideas and your work has been extremely inspiring. Disha, Vibha, Suhaib, I would love to continue this conversation. Oh, and I mean that I have so much to learn from all of you. I really, really mean this. And I don't want to take up too much of everyone's time, just imposing my notes uh, on the wonderful insights that you've shared. But I would love to see if audiences have questions, and I see a lot of questions, and let's open it up to everyone to ask questions. Um, there are I'm sorry guys, I think that we may have a limitation on time now. Uh, so I'm just going to start taking some questions. I think there are a lot of questions for Disha. uh, you have inspired so many people to wonder clearly, and uh, that has inspired a lot of curiosity, Disha. So one question is from Prathamesh. Apart from reservation, what other methods of representation, what other tools that can you propose at perhaps, and I think the question implies at the level of policy, at the level of large scale rollout of policy for better representation? Disha, you're on mute, sorry.
Hello. Yeah. Apart from reservation, I think we've not even reached the full potential of reservation. Most universities, colleges, even employment spaces, in public employment, there's reservation, but the seats remain vacant. And the as far as policy is concerned, I think the policy should be really driven to implement reservations. In fact, we're talking about law schools, and most law schools, even national law schools at this point, are not implementing the OBC reservation, right? And we are in 2021 now, right? In most law schools, you only see reservations for SCs and STs. We're also at a time when we're talking about the transgender bill, and we're talking about reservations for transgender persons as well, and how many institutions are really implementing that, right? So we've not even really reached a point where reservation has been fully implemented. And it all depends on the state's will. When there is that will, you will see that there are certain institutions that are implementing, but then there are others that aren't. Coming to the question of beyond reservation, I think that most law firms, or most corporate houses for that matter, in the name of merit, or in the name of efficiency, effective manner of working, they continue to operate with this sense of impunity, and they continue to be really unrepresentative spaces, right? They are completely hegemonized by the upper castes, right? And all in the name of merit. And these spaces, these corporate houses, these private entities, these private sector entities will have to start taking steps to, sort of have an affirmative action policy, right? You see that in the US, that most big firms or corporate houses will be questioned for not having enough representation, and they will have to, at least to save their human face, to at least to create that sense of, oh, we are having diversity and inclusion. They are having these policies, they are having affirmative action policies. They are ensuring that there are candidates and employees from marginalized backgrounds, right? So there is that attempt. When it comes to India, you will see that there is some talk about diversity and inclusion, but it stops at gender. We will have 50% women employees, but who are these women employees? Are, again, they're all upper caste employees. The same stuff happened also with the recent appointments in the Supreme Court. Everyone was going gaga about, oh, like there are women in the Supreme Court. Yes, great, there are women, but what about Bahujan women? You're talking about Bahujan women. Where are the Adivasi women? Where are OBC women? Where are Dalit women? Right? So you did not see that, and it's unfortunate that any and every talk on diversity and representation, or diversity and inclusion, stops at gender. Like gender is like this homogeneous identity or entity, and there is no nuance to that. But coming to again, what are the other things? You might have an affirmative action policy and you might have employees, but it is also important to ensure that these spaces are safe for people you're employing from marginalized sections, right? To have a sexual harassment cell, an ICC, to have an anti-discrimination cell, to have mechanisms within these corporate houses or these spaces or institutions that ensure that people from marginalized social backgrounds are safe in those spaces and they're not discriminated against, right? And going a little beyond that, I'd like to quote Angela Davis, because diversity and inclusion is so much of a buzzword. Everyone is also talking about my organization, SEED, because it is, diversity inclusion is a buzzword. People like that. But we're also very skeptical about this. We are skeptical that, and Angela Davis has warned us about it. She said that diversity and inclusion has become a buzzword, but it is also, we'll have to be very careful about it, because these organizations and these corporate houses are going to use that to show a human face, right? To create that sort of a human face that, oh, we have these kind of employees from diverse sections. But whether those structures, whether the foundation of these institutions are really truly representative, that is the question that we need to ask, whether the foundation is still being hegemonized by the same class of people. These are the questions that we need to ask, and therefore this kind of organizations showing on paper numbers is not enough, right? You will have to have diverse opinions, diverse people challenging status quo and the existing systems at the top level, right? Where decisions are taken. So this is really, that is a challenge for SEED. This is really the challenge that we are facing, to go beyond just the numbers. So yeah.
Not just facetious and simplified representation, not just statistical representation, but a deep, profound representation at the level, at the very first principle, first foundation level, where there is where uh, representation in true decision making at source. Thanks so much for that, Disha. And Saurabh Karn has a question for uh, Vibha, I believe, which is uh, what kind of tools are available at the moment? What kind of tools are already available for people um, outside of people who do not have immediate access to legal systems? What kind of tools can they already access to be able to uh, feel a greater sense of access to justice and law?
Right. So I think most of the tools that are accessible to those who are outside the legal sphere, I don't think have come from the state. Just a minute. So why don't you go ahead with your question? I'll be right back. I'm so sorry.
Right. In the meantime, I'll just read a comment from Yamuna. Thank you, Yamuna, for this wonderful comment. These young
Hi.
people have
Sorry.
opened.
So sorry about that. My internet was fluctuating in and out. I'm back. Yeah, so I do think that the tools that are available to citizens who aren't necessarily in the legal sector right now have come from civil society, right? And there are so many wonderful organizations that you can look at to be a part of the legal and justice sphere. For example, there's Civis that deals with pre-legislative consultative processes, where when the government puts up legislations to get feedback from regular citizens like us, Civis puts up all of these bills or all of these drafts up on their website, where you can actually go through it and give feedback on what you think should be changed in those documents and in those drafts, right? Which is a lovely and really direct way to be involved with law and justice. And then there are more indirect ways that you can do it, right? For example, what we're doing at Outlawed India, which is coming up with formats that you can use and which are available on our website. So if at any point you want to file a right to information application, if at any point you want to file a complaint with the police, if at any point you want to apply for government benefits, for example, if you are a pregnant lactating mother, what kind of benefits can you avail from the government? How do you apply for it? If you come from a family where you're eligible to avail the 25% reservation under the right to education, how can you go about applying for it? What's the process? These are all things that organizations like us and other organizations make a lot more accessible, because we realize how difficult it is. I remember the first time I was trying to help someone file an application under RTE. I remember calling 15 different people to figure out how it goes, simply because it's so complicated. So there are a lot of organizations as part of civil society that have come up with these tools to make it slightly easier to be involved in law and justice. I do think that the state needs to be doing more, but I think your best bet is to look up organizations that are involved in law and justice to see how you can be more involved. And if you want to be more directly involved, see if you can teach someone about the law, see if you can talk to someone about simple things, clarify their questions. You don't need to be a lawyer to be involved in law and justice. And I think that's where it starts. But yeah, lots of tools available to be involved. Yeah.
Great, thank you so much for that, Vibha. And you can probably share some of those tools that you mentioned, if these are easy for audiences here who are curious to go to have access to. So I'll just take a question that is for me here. I'm sorry, Sonali, because Sonali is making a very valid point. Whether the mainstream media, which consumes the caste class crisis many times, the single screen had a reach beyond classes and castes. So undermining mainstream could precisely be the issue, don't you think? I completely agree with you, Sonali. I do not mean to deride the possible impact of collective discourse, the possible impact that or derived collective discourse for that matter at all. In fact, the mainstream, if you really think about it, is actually not something that's the loudest and most visible in this region. When I travel across this region, I I find I find bhajan malas philosophical discourses that are available in forms of magazine and cheap booklets at 2 rupees a copy, and that to me continues to be the true mainstream of the region. The humble local newsletter, or the humble locally published communication, which is now seen more and more uh, we are also seeing the versions of that on social media for those who have access to that now, which is YouTube, which was once Doordarshan. So I do believe that these are channels of possibilities. These are channels of great possibilities of change, which have the potential to go beyond the hegemony of caste as seen in the controlled mainstream of which is often the loudest Hindi film in this region. So I was only sharing my cynicism about because I stay there. I spend a lot of my time working in this space, and I see what challenges one faces in this region, and why it's been so difficult, especially in the last 10 or 15 or 20 years, increasingly difficult to take some of the most important conversations and convert them to mainstream narrative fiction. So a lot to say about that. But Sonali, thanks for your point. I agree with you. I think uh, um, mainstream. You're saying yes, mainstream is caste blind. Can we undermine its impact and the sort democratization that it does in micro spaces? So I completely agree with you. That it's we have the capacity to use conversation, use collective discourse for very high impact and change belief and change behavior at that. Thanks for making that point, Sonali.
Thank you, Anand.
I think I can see Tamanna, so I believe it's time.
Yes, unfortunately,
for
we're
us
at
to wind up.
time, and I know there were a lot of questions that we didn't get to come to. Maybe we can take this conversation public. You can tweet at them or DM them, and maybe we can get to some of the answers that way. But thank you, Anand. Thank you, Vibha, Suhaib, Disha. This was great. I think just like seeing where everybody is at, and the kind of steps you've taken to interact with law and justice in your own ways. I hope everyone is able to go out to a great weekend, and maybe also ask someone that you meet along the way, what do you think justice is? And as we were talking about today, conversation is the most important thing. So maybe start a conversation around this with some of your friends or families. But thank you, everyone, and have a good weekend.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Okay, a big thank you to BIC and Agami for having us. This was a lovely conversation. And Disha, Suhaib, you guys were incredible. I love listening to you speak. And Anand, you were the best moderator for this discussion. So thank you so much. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Thank you everyone. Really so inspired to have met all of you. And Disha, thank you so much. Really incisive and inspiring. Suhaib, Vibha, Disha, I hope to talk to all of you very soon again. Tamanna, thanks for bringing me on board.
Yeah, thank you.